Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the Smarta Podcast. I am so beyond excited to get into today's episode because guess what? It's one that will definitely teach you to be comfortable being surrounded with the uncomfortable. Not only is it going to teach you this notion, but it's going to teach you three other essential things that you should master and you should implement in your everyday life, which are these. Number one, make sure what your inner story is. And that's all going to get explained in the episode. Number two, importance of storytelling. How it can take you so far in both the world of business and your personal life. And number three, sometimes in life, you need a laugh. And I have a very funny story that just happened to me a couple of days ago, right about this, let's say, rule that you yourself can implement. And that was, as I was taking a walk to meet a friend, and this day was completely raining. I mean, it was raining, pouring, and I had my umbrella up. I was walking to meet my friend. And I remember as I was walking down the street, all of a sudden there came this bus speeding down to my right, and in a puddle that I didn't even see, stepping right through it, splashing all the water on me, I get drenched. I mean, fully drenched. My jeans are fully soaked. My shirt, my phone in my pocket gets water in its ports. And I just remember my jaw dropped. Bus was gone already. I couldn't have done anything about it. And do you know what I did just in that moment? I laughed. I laughed at the moment, and I completely turned around and looked at the guy behind me that saw the whole thing happening, was about to ask me if I was okay, if everything was wrong, if I needed help. Just as soon as he saw the facial expression that I had, he changed into laughing as well. And that just goes for how much of a ripple effect you can create by just taking on a more positive attitude onto something that you're experiencing, whether it's negative or unpleasant. And I thought just in that moment about Doug's advice. And I thought, what a nice interpretation I had. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking with the Doug Thompson. Not just any Doug, the Doug Thompson. Doug has captivated audiences worldwide for over 2 decades as an edutainer on stage. His TEDx talk, the most important story you will ever tell, and over 400 presentations showcase his master storytelling abilities, turning technical jargon into engaging narratives. With certifications from MIT, Professional Education, Microsoft, and Tanium, his passion for excellence is evident. Yet his real superpower is connecting with people through storytelling, bringing a human touch to tech, and inspiring diverse perspectives. The Doug Thompson, welcome on the Smarta Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Okay, here's where I want to take you first. If you can talk directly to the listener, what are the 3 things they will learn if they take to heart everything that you will share today?
Sure. The first thing is making sure you understand what your inner story is. That's where all things start. It builds a foundation from that. The second thing is, hopefully, as we go through the questions and all that, how to sort of discover your own storytelling style, piece of that. We all have that ability. And the final thing is you will laugh. You will have to take away a little bit of humor from this and realize that sometimes life, you just need to laugh. And that's sort of my goal in life.
Yeah, I love that. Storytelling, making sure what your story is, and you will laugh. I also want to add to that last point that you said there, because celebration and laughing, therefore, plays such a big part in my life and celebrating every little success along the way. So the fact that you mentioned that is very interesting, and I cannot wait to unpack our conversation today. So the first topic that I want to talk to you about is storytelling.
Mhm.
So you're well known for your storytelling skills, especially in the tech world. Can you go ahead and tell me why storytelling is so important for you, even in
Mhm.
something as technical as artificial intelligence or cybersecurity?
Oh, so I've my entire career I've been in technology. And even when I was back at Microsoft, my previous employer, I was in pre-sales. So it's always sort of you have to talk to a lot of people, and it's not always the fellow nerds that you have to talk to. They often don't have the budget, so you've got to learn to talk to CMOs, CFOs, CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the organization like that. And typically, they do not understand technology at the ones and zeros level. I'll just, just basically the programming algorithms. You might as well
Mm-hmm.
be watching a chicken watching a television. The reaction you get sometimes if you go there. And so I learned um, to use stories to relate to something that they could understand, something
Mm-hmm.
they were familiar with. When I teach storytelling, one of the very first things that it's actually the second thing is start your stories where your audience lives. And what
Mm-hmm.
I mean by that is what language are you going to use? Are you going to use words that they're familiar with, or are you going to use analogies that they're familiar with? To
Mm-hmm.
sort of establish that baseline. One, I understand your day-to-day life. I understand enough about you that I care, and what I share should hopefully have an impact on that. And in
Mm-hmm.
technology, especially that way, if I'm talking to a marketing officer, I'm going to talk about things that are important to marketing people. And then explain that, technology will take care of that. And usually I don't get very deep into it, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
use analogies and stuff. And I do a lot of LinkedIn stalking and stuff, stuff like that, where I want to understand them, right? Who's the audience going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And that way, maybe we share something we like golf or something like that. Or like I said, behind me, you can't see it, but I've got pictures of triathlons. I've done triathlons. What can I use from that background to create a story that or an analogy that they will understand how that will solve their problems? And as an author, you understand sort of understanding what your audience does and setting that stage and setting up the environment, if you will, the
Mm-hmm.
background. And the technology is very important because there is a very big dividing line between those that understand it and those that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And through stories, you're able to sort of overcome that chasm and do that. But you have to go to them. They will not come to you. And that's why the storytelling is really important in that.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think it's the best way to bring something as complex as technology and simplify that down to an audience that might not be familiar at all with it. So I'm really curious if you could go ahead and tell me what your definition of storytelling is.
Hmm. It is it is a vehicle to get a message across. That to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's what the storytelling is. Unlike an author's done a big book and a novel or something like that, I usually have mine are short stories. And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they're just simply little anecdotes that go along with it. But by using stories, it's more than facts and figures. So if you go back to my TED talk, when I opened it up, I started off giving a string of numbers and then I told a story.
Mm-hmm.
And in that TED talk, I referred back later. I said, "Okay, can you tell me what those numbers were?" And the people can't, but they could tell me a little bit of background about the story. And again, it gets back into the brain science of the more parts of your brain you get engaged in a story, and really stories are the only way to do this, the more likely you are to be remembered, to be memorable about things.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can add a story that adds, not only just facts, but a little emotional engagement with it. If I can paint a word picture or show them a picture that then creates a visual picture of that or a sound, then I've made that connection. And storytelling is all about making that connection to convey information. If you think back about you're much younger, I've got grandkids that are older than you are. But if I ask you in your point in life where you are now, what is your fondest memory of your youth that you bring forward?
That's still quite difficult. Wait, let me think about this one. I think it would have to be at my grandmother running around with children on bicycles looping the park. So
Can you still hear the sounds of the kids laughing? Can you still see the
yeah,
smile on your grandmother's
yeah,
face?
yeah,
That's what I'm talking about. That story will be with you forever.
yeah.
That it goes on because you've got it in so many different pieces of your brain. And as you're telling the story, I can see the smile on your face come up. And again, you're reliving that experience. And that's the power of storytelling. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, today's environment where you've got a smartphone, which makes us all dumber, it's text, it's little bits of stuff like that where you don't, when I grew up, we had one phone in the house and it was on the wall. And if you were lucky, you had a 30-foot cord on it where you could get out of your parents' earshot to have a conversation. Or you'd meet people at school and it was a face-to-face thing where we're all born to tell stories, but we don't exercise that muscle. It's like anything else. Today's
Hmm.
technology does not necessarily lend itself to telling a story.
Hmm.
So how do I, and this gets back to where I talk to youth, like I like going to seniors and going into college where people are about to graduate and tell them stories, tell them about my career, tell them these other things, because they're not really armed with that skill set, which will set them apart when they get to, like a corporation or to get to a job. If you can master those things, you'll be a lot more successful than those that don't.
Hmm. I agree. Yeah. I really like that you showed me what you mean by painting a picture or painting more precisely an emotional picture. And I completely agree that that sends you such a far way with connecting with an audience. And I think that's one of the main keys that I think differentiates talking in public with storytelling. So you've delivered over 100 presentations globally. If you had to pick one habit that you learned throughout your career that brought you to where you are today to give to students who are nervous about public speaking or telling their own stories, what would that one be?
No, keep your message simple.
Mm-hmm.
Break it down. Can you explain it to my mother? I always use that example a lot. Because if you keep it at that level, you're going to be able to connect with more people, even, overcoming a language barrier. One of the lessons I learned, I was in Japan and we actually had a translator. And I was redoing a presentation that I'd done, 20 times before, mainly in English speaking audiences. And there were parts in there where there was some humor.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned through, I would tell the joke and the interpreter, there was always a delay. So learning to speak with interpreters, a little challenge. But there was no laughter in those places. And when I talked to the interpreters later, I said, what? Well, we didn't tell them the joke because it really wouldn't make sense to them. I said, oh, okay. So it's keep your message very simple, very straight, just know that it's going to I always like to, even though as I give the same presentation over and over again, I like to leave a little room in it to make a connection with that specific audience.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the body of the work is the same, maybe it's an opening, hey, funny thing happened to me on the work today, something like that. Some topical news that is here as well. That again, I paid attention. I've made that unique for them because I've tailored it for them because I've made that little. It wasn't just something that you just go over to. I see too many people do the same content and there's no connection to the audience. It's
Yeah.
how do you personalize that? So learn to personalize, leave a little room to personalize, even though the body of your message is the same. How do I help? This gets back to point number two I was talking about earlier. How do I start the story where the audience is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's the key to I find to really getting successful because the audience is very forgiving. They want you to succeed. One of the things I tell people that's scared about getting on stage is that nobody wants to see you fail. Well, okay, you got two people out in the audience who want to see you fail, but they hate everybody. So
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to make them happy.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody else wants you to succeed. How do you take advantage of that goodwill? And again, it's making that connection, going to meet them, that they're more likely to cut you some slack if you have technical problems or something like that, because you will have technical problems. You will have these other things that are out of your control. If you expect there's another tip in that. If you expect something to fail, when it does, it doesn't ruin your day.
Mm-hmm.
In the triathlons behind me, I was a mentor for Team in Training. It's a group over here that raises money for leukemia and lymphoma by doing endurance events. So I was a mentor, and I was always tell my athletes, a lot of times this was the first time they had done anything like that. Again, it was sort of motivation. I said, look, expect for at least one thing in the race to go bad. And if it does, then you're prepared. Hey, this is the one thing I can go on. It doesn't ruin your day. And if it doesn't go bad, then it's a bonus day. That's one of those rare days you get to enjoy everything. But if it
Mm-hmm.
does, again, okay, that's the hiccup. Let's go ahead and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think I want to get back to the thing that you said about learning to personalize
Mhm.
each message or each presentation, even if you do it over and over again. Because I think personalizing something, tailoring it to one person or to the audience that you're talking with, can really send you that extra mile in terms of the impact that you'll have on them and how they'll remember you. But more than that, making them feel heard. So I think that's a very important thing to do. And so I want to give the audience a one exercise, and that is learn to just personalize something today. If it is sending another company email, or let's say you're in school and you have to give a presentation to your class, go the extra mile and do something different that will be linked to the audience. Now let's talk about technology. So you've worked for Microsoft 20 years. Now, technology is an all evolving, let's say, platform or device. And it's evolving so fast, especially with AI and cybersecurity. So, my question for you is, how can young people prepare themselves to succeed in careers that are constantly changing, particularly for the creative arts? And if you think that is a dying industry.
Um, I'll answer the last part first about the creative arts. I don't think it's dying. It is definitely changing. And those that are able to take advantage of the technology the best will be the most successful.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, the underlying creativity is something that's unique to human. AI can't duplicate that. So the fear of AI taking your job, if you're in the creative piece of that, is it something, is it truly creative, or is it something that you just simply do very well? For
Mm-hmm.
example, like I'd say photography or something. There are those photographers who are very gifted that can see something else out of, that makes something out of a picture that nobody else can see. It's art, it's the other thing. But if it's simply like a picture of a bear or something like that, I can get AI to create that and it'll look pretty good. But that's so exercise those things that are uniquely human where you can see the nuances and stuff that doesn't necessarily fit into a known pattern. Technology is very sort of black and white in that, although it's getting a little gray. And just understand that what you did yesterday is probably obsolete today.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I improve that? How can I take this journey to check things out? And always sort of the way that I've stayed relevant in technology, you're right, things have changed so much since the Windows XP days when it was the first time I got to Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
So now everything's in the cloud and chat GPT. Went through like three business cycles, if you will, while I was there. We had, CEO changes, these other things. Almost that went out of business when Apple kicked their butt. There was just a whole lot of different changes that went on with the business. And the key to sort of being successful is one, always making yourself relevant. So how can I change what I'm doing to face the new model of things that are going on? But
Mm-hmm.
then always keeping an eye out for what's emerging. What's this emerging technology about? Even if you don't, at the end of the day, implement it, if you know about it, it gives you a sort of a North Star to steer to. And what I mean by that is if you've ever been sailing, if anybody's ever been sailing and you want to get across a body of water or a lake, it's very rarely a straight line with the wind at your back. typically you've got the wind coming from an angle, or worst case is coming straight at you, but you need to go across. So how do you do that? And you're
Mm-hmm.
using a technique called tacking, where you're sort of going back and forth, but you're always keeping the goal in mind. Same thing with swimming in a triathlon. You're in the water, there's no line on the bottom of a lake. How do I know where I'm going? And it's looking up. Sighting is something that's further out than you need to, something big that you can easily spot, but I can sort of adjust my course as I go along. And
Mm-hmm.
so keeping, again, knowing where you fit with the tools that are available to you today. What could I do and maybe use them better? Are they really? Feel free. You have to let go of things that you know very well and be comfortable being uncomfortable. You
Mm-hmm.
know you're in the right area and you're growing when you're not quite sure how it's going to turn out or the result that's going on, yet you go forward anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And not being afraid to fail. That's something that, especially in schools, at least in the US, failure is not encouraged. As a matter of fact, and when you're in a race to, and I do this talk to graduating students, I call it Your Career Doesn't Have a Syllabus. Because when you're in education, your whole life, you've got a syllabus, you've got a book of what it takes to be successful. I know
Mm-hmm.
exactly the waypoint there. I know what I need to do. And sometimes playing well with others is not part of that. Again, you risk partnering with somebody else, much like you as a host, when you contact somebody to be on the guest, it's sort of a risky thing where they sort of work with my audience to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And but if you get that magic, if you find that right person to partner with, you can both do better, more than what you each could do individually together. So when I talk to people, be not being afraid to see somebody that complements some areas that you don't do, but also trying new things and knowing that failure isn't permanent. It's only if you quit. So again, in education, if you fail, you risk not getting the highest thing in a class and scholarships and blah blah blah. But those that are adventuresome, I mean, in the entrepreneurial spirit is probably the best example to follow. Because even if you work for an organization, you can have an entrepreneurial mindset in that, for my business that I manage, work that I do, whatever, I'm going to try to do things a little bit differently. If the rules are not written down that I can't do something, let's try that out. You may find out, that you're more successful than you ever imagined.
Mm-hmm. Learn to be comfortable, being comfortable and being uncomfortable. Be comfortable by being uncomfortable.
Being comfortable, right? Yeah, being uncomfortably
It can get a little
comfortable.
confusing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to get used to that's the feeling that you're going to get.
Yeah.
Like you're out there and you're not sure exactly what's going to happen. This is uncomfortable, but that's your signal that, hey, I'm growing.
Mm-hmm. And I completely stand on by that because I feel that if you acknowledge that failures are essential to growing, I think that if you keep going into the unknown and tackle something, a challenge every single day, yes, while being fearful, but overcoming those fears, I think that can get you to grow as a person in ways that you haven't imagined before. So where I want to take you next is your career as a best-selling co-author. So in your latest book, Rattled Awake, you talk about transformative moments that make us rethink our lives. Can you share a moment from your own life that shaped your career?
Sure, and that's the example I wrote. So in the book, there was 11 authors, and we each wrote a chapter about
Mm-hmm.
that moment that rattled us awake. One of the things that and I'm horrible about sitting down long enough to write. I'm impressed by your ability to sit down and get a book out. I've I've got that in my head, but I've got this shiny object syndrome that my brain works in edit mode and create mode at the same time. And as you probably know, that doesn't work. You don't get
Mm-hmm.
don't get very
Yeah.
far. I've got to work on that. I know that's a challenge. But in the we're sitting around, so we spent the weekend doing this book, writing the text of the book. Then we had these Zoom meetings. We're all talking about each other format, and I'm listening to some of these other stories. Their near death experience. I mean, these are all things that you typically think of. could I do that? We always have that. Would I be able to sort of rise to that occasion? But people from abuse, alcohol. I mean, all these different evils and stuff that they've recovered come to where they are today.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge that I've had a pretty unremarkable life in that standpoint, in that I haven't faced those situations. I've been fortunate in my career to go on and do things. And so immediately, this gets back to the last point here just a little bit. The subconscious comes into play and says, you don't have a story. You can't do anything here to contribute to do this. And I talk about this in my TED talk where, that this is that inner bully that you have. And first I started comparing myself against everybody else. Again, I don't have this. I can't. And it made writing much harder. And so I finally realized I've gotten very good at recognizing my inner bully. I call him Simon, but I recognize when he's poking his head out. And I've learned to ask him, where are the receipts? Prove that I can't do this or I don't have to do that. And it quiets him up a little bit. But anyway, so I sat down that Sunday morning when we're supposed to turn in our chapter. I've got like no words. I've got an idea of what's supposed to be happening. And I just got into this flow state of telling the story, long intro to get to the question that you ask, about sort of a point in my career where I was very good at what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't taking my own advice and feeling uncomfortable. I was very comfortable with my day-to-day life. Most days were good. Get a new manager, which happens. They've got a different perspective. They get a new manager. People that have been your sponsor and advocate have sort of changed. And I wasn't, it was at the point where basically I was getting voted off the island. If you watch Survivor. And so I oddly though, in reflection, as I got to think about it, God had been showing me I needed to do bigger things. I needed to go to a bigger stage and do something else. And giving me these little small glimpses and things that you don't notice until you look backwards. Oh, that was an inflection point. That was an inflection point. And it taught me that, okay, he basically said, look, I've tried to give you examples that you could do things better, but now I'm going to force you to go do that. I'm going to force you out of your comfort zone. I'm going to force you to go do something. And so that meeting where it made me be better in tune with the things around me and what I really could do. And was I really happy, even though I was satisfied? Was I really happy? Was I being challenged? And over that period of about a year, I realized that, yeah, I can do bigger and better things. So when I changed companies, I was a new employee training at 60 years old. That's far from a new employee.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reinvigorated because, again, I was challenging myself. I was learning a platform that I'd not been exposed to before.
Mm-hmm.
When I got here, they handed me a Mac. I've used a PC my entire life. I mean, they handed me a Mac. We used Google Apps. We used all these things I'd never used before. And it was like, wow, okay, I am really living in this fire here because every day is a learning opportunity to go. But it really lighted that spark again. Again, the moment Rattling Wake was basically, look, you're getting voted off the island. You need to go do something else. Are you ready to retire? Are you ready to do something else? And I said, so again, it wasn't an overnight thing. It was a several month journey. But looking back again, I'm thankful that happened, and it gave me that opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's amazing. And I really love that you still are open-minded to learning new stuff and learning new things. And every single time you get an opportunity, you take it. And this is, I think, something that's very valuable. Just always keeping a learning mindset as you go through life, because really it's a lifelong process. It doesn't stop when you get out of university. You constantly have to explore books and learn new experiences. So
Yeah, when you get out of university, that's actually when the learning starts because there is no syllabus. You
Mhm.
have to figure out your own syllabus and your own path. And that, again, I wish we could do a better job of preparing the youth for that.
Yeah, I agree. Doug, you're a professional speaker, a best-selling co-author, ex-Microsoft, but you're also very sporty. So I want to talk about the two Ironmans that you've completed. What did you learn from those experiences, and how do you apply those lessons to your personal and professional life?
One, I've got a new knee out of the whole experience. That's
Wow.
another. That's another. It's another story together.
Mm.
I'll give a little backstory running up to the Ironman. Is that I've done some shorter ones. I've done when I was growing up. I have asthma. So at the time when I was growing up, the therapy for asthma was sit down there on the bench and don't do anything. Basically, become a vegetable. So I had to watch all my friends play and do these other things while I'm sitting there not able to participate. And so it got to a point. I was watching the Iron Man. This is way back where Julie Moss, she went crawling across the finish line of an Ironman. And for those people not familiar with an Ironman, it's a 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike ride, and then a marathon after that. So it's a long day. And it inspired me that, hey, she could step up and do that, that maybe I can go do something like that. So I was just starting out with short ones and all. And then I liked them. I had basically two careers. One, I was doing it when my kids were young, and we used it to travel to go to different places and do some things. Then I retired for the first time, just because I was sort of burnt out. I didn't have enough time, and it took the new job, and it just sort of took some time. And then later, when we moved to Seattle, I won again. The team and training thing came up, and I was an athlete in that, and I was my mentor at the time. Here's another lesson in life. It's either good or bad. He worked for a beer company, and we're sitting around at an Olympic distance, which is what most people are familiar with. That's like a 1,500-meter swim, a 24-mile bike ride, and then a 10K. And we just finished that, and we're drinking a beer, and this is in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and they're about to host their first Ironman the next year. And I said, "Are you kidding me? The furthest I've ever done is a an Olympic distance triathlon.
Mhm.
This is like four times that far. You're kidding?" And I'm an old man. I'm an old fat guy. And he hands me another beer, and we talk. So about four beers later, it would sound like a really good idea, and we went out and signed up. So be careful who your friends are. So
Uh-huh.
you sign up about a year out, and the key to that, one of the key things you take out of that is you got to show up every day. And if you show up every day just to train, it's not about the race itself. It's about how do I get there by doing a body of work, sort of an unremarkable body of work because I'm just showing up every day. If you take that to the work life, if I'm showing up every day, I'm already better than 75% of the people out there. Because
Mhm.
some people just their mailing is they look at it as a task. They're not really engaged in what they're doing. They don't like what they're doing. And so by doing that, I'm already better than some of those things. So that consistency, right? Because it needs to go up there and do that. So then we get to race day, and when you're in the race, they always tell you that at a certain point in time you're going to sort of hit the wall, and your inner voice is going to tell you need to quit and stuff. Nobody told me that was going to be almost the entire race because I'm going forth. It's at that point in time it was the hottest race they had ever had. At one point in the race was 105 degrees Fahrenheit out on the bike course, and I'm watching pros drop out left and right, and I'm really hating life on the bike. The swim was okay because I swim pretty well. Get on the bike, and I'm thinking my bottom hurts, my feet hurt. I'm just like, well, why? I paid a good amount of money to go do this. All these thoughts are going on in my head that I have to battle through and push through. And as you go through, then I had a nutritional problem. So this is where I learned that expect for things to go wrong.
Mhm.
I'd been training at 70 degrees with this drink that had protein and all these calories and stuff because you have to consume calories during that time of day. You just can't physically store enough. And at 70 degrees it was fine. At 100 degrees you couldn't drink it. So I've got nothing to get calories in at that point in time.
Mhm.
So I adapted to start using stuff that was on the course. And so I had a fallback plan, but I was just literally, I was falling asleep riding the bike, climbing a hill at one point. I get to the top of the hill, the aid worker there was an aid station, says, "How you feeling?" I said, I am not feeling so good. And he says, that's strange. You don't look so good either. Here. He gave me a seat on the side in the shade, gave me a frozen banana with the potassium and stuff. I got back in. And this time I had this discussion, which I have is, one side of the brain, again, the inner voice saying, oh, you can quit. You're an old guy, old fat guy. You did pretty well. You should just quit. And then the other part of my brain that's helped make me successful in this, could I live with myself if I quit? As they say, pain's temporary, but quitting's forever.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily that part got me through. Again, it's sort of related to the showing up every day. Just doing, nobody likes getting out when it's cold and it's rainy to do that, but it's a day I need to go do that. In this case, I went on. And I finished the first one with you have 17 hours to finish. So I finished about 11:20 that night. So I had about 40 minutes left to go before I wasn't a finisher. So it's a very long day, but you're encouraging other athletes. They're encouraging you. If you get in there that last hour, these are the people that typically have been having a bad day. And so we formed a club. We are going to support each other and help get us across the finish line. And then, so 4 years later, the same guy, again, I got to get better friends, talked me into going up to Canada to do one. And so, okay, fine, I've done one before. I joined a more elite club if we've done multiples. And we went out a year ahead of time and camped out on the sidewalk to get an entry, because at that point in time, you had to be on premises basically to get an entry slot. And got the slot, went through a whole year of training, but I moved partially in there. So I moved about 4 months from when I moved to Texas, about 4 months from race day. And I'm like, okay, I just need to quit. I don't have time. Again, my wife in this case here was, oh, look, you did this. You paid $800 plus whatever. We're going to go ahead and do this. So fine, I trained, I did some different things, and I got in that race. And the nutrition wasn't a problem, but the asthma kicked in. There was something in the air or something about halfway through the bike, and I had to walk and run. Anyway, I finished, I cut about 30 minutes off the other time, so I finished faster. But it wasn't exactly how I wanted to. But again, I can't live with myself. I've dropped out of one race, and that's because I had to go to the emergency room to get stitches. It's just not in me. So just show up every day and don't quit. That's the biggest thing that sports tells you, is your body's capable and mind are capable of a lot more than what we give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
We set that bar way too low with what's going on. And again, some of it's our subconscious. It wants to protect us. That's what it's designed for. Although there's not a lot of dinosaurs running around to step on us anymore, but so it invents things, right? I'm not good enough. I can't tell a story. I'm not worthy of a TED Talk. And I fought that for months when I went to do the TEDx. And it's just the psychological battle, the brain, the way the brain works and the brain science is very amazing. And if you can understand the signals that it's sending, you can optimize what you do. And again, whether it be an endurance race where you're sort of stripped bare of everything else, you get down to sort of what keeps me moving forward. And at that point in time is my mind, because it's telling my body to keep moving forward. And that's just simply the way that if you can find that out on yourself without having to do an Ironman, I highly recommend it. But, just know that you're capable of a lot more. Your parents were right. You can do anything that you put your mind to. Well, most anything. I can't dance, but that's a whole other, that's a rhythm thing.
Mm-hmm. I want to link all of the topics that we've just talked about and ask you, what is the correlation between sport, the tech world, and public speaking? What are the skills that helped you be successful?
If I get that, it's showing up every day with an attitude to learn something new, and then I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, or one of the other things is, through sports, you learn a lot about strategy and how it needs to change, right? How if you take football, for example, the game plan looks really good till that ball snapped the first time, and then everything changes. You got to adapt. How do you adapt to those changes that go along to your game plan on the way? Because, there's people I've talked to in university. I'm going to do this in 2 years and this in 4 years and this, and then I'm going to be CEO in 8 years. I'm like, sound like a good plan. What happens when X, Y, Z happens? Well, that's not going to happen. Well, if you're lucky, it's not, but It's more likely going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
How do you learn to adapt what you're doing for what's the next step I could take to get me towards that goal, that big thing that's across the lake, right? Distilling it down. Don't try to take on everything at once. Again,
Mm-hmm.
an Ironman's a very long race. It's making it mile after mile to go do that, and knowing that I may have to adapt when I get going into the wind, or if I need to eat something else, I don't have it. Again, that adaptability that comes along with that, and learning to just keep pushing forward.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're capable of much more than we think. I don't limit myself by what's going on. Too many people get in there. I mean, you have those kids saying, well, I can be CEO, but then something happens and they get sent back and they say, okay, I can't do it. Well, no, maybe this just isn't the right company to be CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you need, listen to these little things that happen and don't look at it as a setback. Look at it as a inflection point of, okay, what is the universe trying to tell me that I need
Mm-hmm.
to go do something else?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't use it as a negative, use it as a positive. Okay, this is a chance. Somebody was smart enough to put a wall here because I needed to go change directions.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all the things there that I've had. And again, technology changes. Windows was bad and now Microsoft is on top, and it just things change. If you stay with it long enough, nothing is perfect. But also then look ahead. There's nobody making ice boxes anymore. Nobody makes a cathode tube TB anymore. Technology will eventually, don't rest on what it is today, because by tomorrow it's probably going to be replaced by something better.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that you have designed obsolescence in whatever that you're making, always be making new things, or how can I make it just 1% better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that. Now, you've summed it up there, but I want to go one level deeper and ask you if you could give any advice to young people finding their passions or interests, questioning what they should do with their future, even if they're not sure about what they want to do, what what would it be?
Well, this varies by person. Again, I'd have to sort of understand where they're coming from, but if I use some generic knowledge, it is always be curious about something else. Don't assume what you know or whatever is necessarily true. You need to validate, trust, but verify.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you really like something, but it doesn't necessarily the path to be, say, like music or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a passion for that. You can keep developing that, but is it going to pay your bills? Okay, what can you do? And it's possible we don't have a work-life balance problem. We have a life problem. It's a life balance. We have one life. There's the work aspect of it that pays the bills, that in some cases enables you to do the thing you're very passionate about until that can sustain you.
Yeah.
It's not mutually exclusive. Don't give up on what really lights your fire, because you need that balance. You need to say, yeah, I can do this, but it takes a lot of energy to do. I need to do something else to refill that energy that comes along, because it's, what is it that gives me the energy reserve when I go speak to people and I'm on stage, that regenerates so much energy that comes across, that enables all the work that you will put into doing the presentation and all the other things that are sort of mundane. That makes that all worth it, and it sort of balances out, and I can keep going and getting better. Too many people sort of think it's an either or, and it's not. It's always an and. You can, again, you can, for example, there's a person I worked with at Microsoft, and she's had many leadership roles. Her name's Donna Sarkar, and then she also has a clothing line that she did. So she didn't study. I mean, she came in computer science later. Has a clothing line that she does. Now she's opened up a wine bar on this, and she's always got this side hustle going on that enables her to be better, gives her energy to do her daytime job,
Mm-hmm.
which takes a place. So there, you can do it. It's just, how do you find that? Don't sit your and if you think that you're comfortable in what you're doing, you probably need to be looking to do something different, because
Mm-hmm.
again, that's the time where you can end up like I did and end up getting voted off the island, because There are other, you're not really growing and adding the extra value that you used to do when you were hungrier to go do that. So that's the advice. And read a lot different, and reading things that not necessarily technology related. And I think you had a question about that either. What are a couple books that I would recommend? And one of them, the first one I recommend is Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss. And it's a big old thick book. I'm showing this is the book here. It weighs a lot, but it's a bunch of short stories where he's interviewed a lot of remarkable people. Okay, the people that we would know, famous athletes, famous entrepreneur, Elon Musk, things like that. And you get a little bit of, it's like a mini podcast. You get a little bit of their insight into what's going on. So there's a lot of things in there that you can take. And then the other book I'd recommend is the Daniel Pink, To Sell Is Human. It's a much lighter read, but everything that you do in life, every job that you have, every relationship you have involves sales, whether it has a quota associated with it or not. For example, like if I'm in technology and I'm an engineer and I'm working on a team and we're trying to come up with the best way to accomplish a task, there's some negotiation that goes on in there. If you got to explain why your idea is better than everybody else's, there's some sales that goes along with it. To get a job, the very first sales job you're going to have is the interview. I was a mentor at a master's program here at University of Texas. And, the first time they had me go talk to them and do the interview, I'm looking at the resumes and I'm looking up every third word because I'm like, what is this field of study? Because what exists today didn't exist when I was in school. And I said, well, I can't teach them anything about the tech. They understand that better than I do, but I can teach them how to, again, sell themselves. And the very first thing is an interview. I said, well, why should I hire you? This is a mock interview. And they would start reading off the resume. I said, no. I can hire anybody from this program and not get fired because you're all brilliant. Why should I hire you? What is your story? Again, you need to understand what your story is. So if you master no other skill other than being able to give an elevator pitch, which is like 20, 30 seconds, here's who I am, here's what I do. The funniest one I heard was done by a guy back at Microsoft, and he worked at Google for a bit. And he met the CEO of Google in the bathroom, and they're doing business. And he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "Well, I'm such and such, and I rescue the world from having to deal with Internet Explorer." He was working on the Chrome browser. Very memorable type thing. So in an interview, you want to at least be memorable so they'll call you back. So what's one little pithy thing that you could tell me about yourself that would make you stand out from everybody else? And then you can have, like a 2-minute pitch, call it a golf cart pitch, and then a longer story where you're doing the interview. But understanding what your story is, and again, that comes from the inside. You have to develop that to your own, is going to set you apart. You're showing up every day and you can explain what you do, and again, in a memorable way. That's my best advice for that.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about the importance of reading, and you've also mentioned 2 books, but I want to still expand on that, especially because here on the Smarter podcast, we have this tradition where I ask the previous guest to leave a question behind for the next guest. And my last guest, Jerry Akoof, left you over this question. What are the 2 most powerful books, in this case, let's say that transformed your life, that you have read that have had an impact somehow on your life?
Oh, well, first I want to find out where he lives so I can go thank him in person. Those 2 books that I just shared, probably the Tribe of Mentors, there was so much knowledge in that because it's like interviewing 50 or 60 people that I got information out of. And you get these different perspectives, and that led to other literary works as well. And then I liked, and this is, Tom Clancy wrote a lot of books. And it taught me the art of creating a very technical story in a way that was engaging. And being that in a lot of his stuff, he did a lot of research on like submarines. I mean, he knew the backstory of a lot of these things that went on from a military perspective and things like that. And I've always been interested in military tactics and things. And so finding that area of interest that complements what you do, but in learning how he wove those things together in a very there was a lot of context. There was always multiple subplots that were going on that were very good. Now, that's from a literary perspective, but another thing that I recommend is podcast. In that Mike Rowe had a podcast called The Way I Heard It. Mike Rowe from Dirty Jobs and stuff like that. So he had a podcast The Way I Heard It, which was an homage to Paul Harvey way back in when I grew up, used to tell the rest of the story. And the way this is told is a little bit in reverse. So they tell you about a person's background and stuff without telling you their name. So they're telling you an unknown story about the background, and you have to sort of go back and figure out who that person is. It gets to be a little game in your head.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned more things again about the art of storytelling from those things than I have anything else. Again, this is my passion. Storytelling is my passion. How do I go do those things? And that's enabled me to do that. So if you're interested in storytelling, listen to those type podcasts where you have that, or even great interviewers where, like I do in mine, and like you're doing here, is what's below the surface. Don't have just simply a superficial answer. There's something else down there. How do you artfully dig at that with questions?
Mm-hmm.
And then my role as a pre-sales, I have to ask a lot of probing questions that aren't necessarily written down. What are they not telling me? And if you can get that information out of things, and so when you read something, what is this book not telling me? What is something else? But that's simply another example of you always being curious and trying to grow and do the next thing. Is you have that little child in you. When we were, I've got a 5-year-old granddaughter that lives with us, and she's constantly curious about other things. I'm like, I hadn't thought about that. It was just something that I assumed that happened. So I have to always be curious. Always ask those questions, because it will get drummed out of you at some point in time if you don't.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about curiosity and
Mm-hmm.
being always showing up every day with an attitude to do things. And you've talked to me about these 2 books in your life story so far. So as we reach the end of today's episode, if you could, we started with you talking to the listener. I want to end it in the same way. If you could talk directly with the listener, what parting advice, what last message do you want to leave them with?
This gets back to one of the things is what is your own story,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you do not know what your story is, and by story, I mean, what is your passion in life? What is the extra value that you bring? What is it that makes you uniquely you? We're all given this sort of hodgepodge of talents, and it's up to us. We're all unique. So I can't compare myself to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes when you're comparing yourself to somebody else, you're comparing their middle to your beginning, and that's not fair. I go back and listen to my first podcast versus my 100 and something. There's a lot of difference in that. I'm sure you're finding the same thing as you go along.
Yeah.
So don't compare yourself to others, because then that will say, okay, here's my story, here's my value. I'm sure of that. Here's things that I do different than others. So in this case here, it's almost like you can look at what they do. How can I make that even better, right? How can I improve on that? Because everybody's audience is different. There's no one person who's going to connect with every audience that's out there. Even if I'm in an audience of 100 people, there's probably 10 that I'm probably not necessarily going to connect with that deeply, right? And in reality, when I go out and do a talk, my goal is to change one person's, that they'll do something different, even just one person. So what is my value? What's my story? Because from there, you've got a solid foundation to build other things. Here's what I can do, because here's what I am.
Mm-hmm.
And, don't necessarily listen to what your inner bullies. Learn to identify your inner bully before all things. What's that negative voice telling you that you can or can't do? And then ask it to show you receipts. That's the best thing to prove a point when I can't do what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
99% of the time they can't. And if they do, it's a very weak receipt. You probably have an excuse for it. But
Mm-hmm.
don't listen to that. Learn to manage it. You can't totally put it away because every time you get to that next level, that bigger level, it kicks in. Um, and you have to sort of overcome it again. Okay, well, fine. Here's this body of work that I've got that I can go do that. So that's the things. That's the advice I would give.
Mm-hmm. Identifying your inner bully, I think everyone can relate to overthinking
Hmm.
and hesitating because you're always emphasizing what could go wrong instead of everything that can happen. And oftentimes we exaggerated so much that not even 1% of what we couldn't fall asleep at night because of doesn't happen the next day. So
Yeah,
identifying.
the brain's wired. Unfortunately, the brain is wired to be negative.
Mm-hmm,
You got to overcome that, and you only
mm-hmm,
overcome that by being aware of it. I mean, it's designed to keep us safe. We don't want to get stepped on by a dinosaur, as I said, or something like that. But we invent, as you said, we invent a lot of problems that never come. We're always imagining the worst case scenario. How about
mm-hmm,
we imagine the best case scenario? If we did that,
mm-hmm.
changes the vibe a lot.
Yeah, I love that. Shifting our perspective to the complete opposite. Thank you so much, Doug, for being on
Mhm.
today's podcast. Best of luck in all the future. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Sonia. Great questions.
There you have it, Doug's amazing advice on how to become better on who you are as a person. And remember that just turning up every single day already sets you apart from the 75% of the other people that didn't. Sometimes you're gonna have bad days. So just turn up every day with the attitude that you wanna do it. And that can already set you far apart. You can complain, you can feel bad, but once you get through the doors of the gym, once you get through the welcoming banner of a new triathlon, have the attitude that you're there to do it. And remember that taking up a new sport can give you the strategies on how to adapt in tough times. That is very crucial skill that you need when you're in charge of a business. And most importantly, if you want to check out the 2 books that Doug mentioned, The Tribe of Mentors by Timothy Ferriss, and number 2, Tom Clancy's novels based on espionage and with these complex storylines that really make you go beyond. Please share this episode with a loved one or someone that you know is into storytelling, has done a lot of triathlons, or wants to start one, because this episode definitely provides the information and the advice from. And if no one told you this today, I want to be the first one that tells you that I believe in you and your ability to build the life of your dreams. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.